In the era of excellent inventive roguelikes like Hades and Dead Cells, PixelJunk Raiders is a major disappointment. Despite a distinct visual style reminiscent of awesome Mobius art, PixelJunk Raiders fails to distinguish itself from the competition in any meaningful way. It does put forth some inventive ideas, but at the same time stumbles over the basics too much for them to matter. As a fresh-faced bounty hunter, it's your job to rescue a bunch of desert-dwelling aliens from squid-like baddies. But beaming down there in the flesh would be stupid, so you've got a limited number of digital avatars to complete your mission. It's a thin setup, and certainly a familiar one. It never really goes anywhere though, and you'll often hear the same repetitive lines from your swarthy mentor congratulating you on nabbing some treasure.
Well done, kiddo!
PixelJunk Raiders does make a great first impression at least. The randomly generated alien worlds you beam down to are awash in a mix of brightly colored, clearly defined landscapes. Massive deserts give way to lush forest and strange alien architecture. Giant stone pillars draw your attention skyward, where the faint outlines of other planets remind you of just how small you are. Though each map is pretty massive, giant alien cubes or plumes of smoke above each location thankfully help keep you from getting too lost. Unfortunately, once you get a bit closer to the action, things fall apart. Raiders wants to give you the impression these kind aliens had a somewhat bustling community, but the drab exteriors and cookie-cutter market stalls and interiors do anything but. Having to thoroughly search through them for the one last alien you're supposed to rescue gets old very quickly. Combat misses the mark as well. It's floaty and unsatisfying, and your battles with aliens big and small feel a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's where most of PixelJunk Raiders' issues rear their ugly heads. In true roguelike fashion, your avatar starts each mission equipped with little more than their fists, 3 lives, and a health bar that gets wiped out in about as many hits. In theory, this encourages you to explore the desert and find weapons. In practice, you're mostly just collecting gems that don't immediately serve any purpose because crafting stations are so rare. Actual weapons are significantly harder to find, and unless you select a specific perk, you end up losing everything upon your painfully sudden death. They're not very interesting either. They're hardly distinguishable from one another and break like used tissue paper after way too few hits. If you weren't into weapons breaking in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you're going to absolutely hate it here. One-on-one fights are pretty mundane stuff, rushing to deplete their health bar before they can take a chunk of yours. Contending with groups is far more difficult, especially once long-range and bigger enemies get added to the mix. Enemy variety is decent, a favorite being the Wild Wild West saw blades that pop up out of the sand and try to mow you down. But once you figure out their tricks, combat rarely manages to surprise. Setting traps is a slightly more effective means of crowd control, but similarly frustrating because supply is so limited and kiting enemies into them isn't much fun. You can summon digital copies of allies too, but they aren't much good in a fight. But that's nothing a few good upgrades can't fix, right? Well, not this time. Raiders has an aggravatingly bare-bones upgrade system. Software patches are interchangeable upgrades that allow for things like wielding hammers, different attack types, and increased health or stamina. The problem is that all of these patches feel critical, so missing one or more feels like playing with one arm or leg tied behind your back, rather than making for an interesting choice about how you want to play. Things like the ability to loot your last corpse or to wield something like a shield in your left hand seems like they should have been unlocked from the get-go instead of doled out at a painfully slow rate. Worst of all, PixelJunk Raiders scoffs at the notion of a balance where missions are long enough to feel meaningful, but short enough to be manageable. A lot of these are dragged out to close to an hour, and when enemies can wipe out most of your health bar in a couple of hits, the dread at the thought of restarting them is real. That's a far cry from what most roguelikes go for, which is creating the feeling that your next run might be the one that really pops off. So it's not that PixelJunk Raiders is too hard, roguelikes are supposed to be hard and rewarding, it's that it's not much fun. Though it has a fun and colorful style, none of it can save PixelJunk Raiders from a painfully thin sense of progression, lackluster combat, annoying objectives, and difficulty curves that are neither fair nor rewarding. When both exploration and combat fail to get their hooks into you, there's nothing pulling you back in for another run, and that undermines any game that's meant to be played through again and again. For more roguelike fun, check out our reviews of Hades and Spelunky 2. For everything else, stick with IGN.